This is the case of a superficial spreading melanoma, which we now know was 0.75 millimeters in depth. Now, obviously, I don't think anyone's going to look at this and not realize it's melanoma. What are your eyes drawn to first as somebody who's extensively studied dermoscopy?
Clinically, my first impression is this is a classic melanoma. But what I think we need to focus on is, what does it look like dermoscopically? What is it about this lesion that makes us think it's a melanoma? The first thing that pops in my mind is the colors. You have dark black, you have a little bit of blue, you have a little bit of white, you have structureless white areas, you have brown, you have light brown, you have just this irregular pigment all throughout the lesion. So those are the first thoughts that pop in my mind.
Do you ever see something that looks like this at first glance and you're then surprised that it turned out to be something other than what you first thought?
Yes. A seborrheic keratosis can have a variety of different colors, but you have to use your clinical judgment. First of all, you look at the lesion, you use your tangential light to see the irregular texture up above on the surface of the skin. Sometimes it has that a warty verrucous-like texture. The ABCDE rule, I'm not a huge fan of it because to me that applies to seborrheic keratosis. Seborrheic keratoses can be asymmetrical, they can have irregular borders, they have a variety of colors, they're larger than a pencil head eraser, and they tend to evolve until they peel off, fall off, and then grow back. So yes, I have seen some lesions that initially I thought, oh, this is a melanoma. And then upon closer inspection with the dermatoscope, it ends up being like a seborrheic keratosis. Or sometimes you can have a pigmented basal cell that you initially think that is a melanoma. But then on closer inspection, you realize, hey, this is a pigmented basal cell.
Now, I don't want to get too off on a tangent, but it seems like to me the worst scenario would be an SK along with a melanoma. Like you said, once you start to see that rough, warty texture, if you're not careful, you could then get into not paying attention to the rest of the lesion.
Facial melanomas. A lot of times, the facial melanomas tend to look like lentigines, and sometimes those lentigines can progress to seborrheic keratoses. But you have to really look at those and see if there's any changes in the periphery or adjacent to it. And then there's certain structures that lead you to believe it may be a melanoma. Usually they're melanoma in situ. It's usually like the grayish circle around the follicle, a little bit of concentrated pigmentation that creates more of a wider, broader reticular pattern. I have seen that on the face. One interesting case I had is a squamous cell colliding with a melanoma. Actually, that was my initial thought when I looked at the lesion. It was a poorly differentiated squamous cell that was growing in a nodular fashion, but right next to it, it had pigmentation. So I wasn't really quite sure. So I just went ahead and took the whole thing. I took a pretty large scoop. It was on an elderly person. And the pathologist contacted me and said, this is a squamous cell that is colliding with a melanoma.
You may not remember. Did you give the pathologist a heads up about that?
I thought it was really interesting. I thought, I wonder if this is a melanoma creeping up upon this squamous cell. And it was, I think my first thought was a melanoma in situ. But when I got the report back, it was actually a pretty deep melanoma. It was greater than 1 millimeter.
For those who don't know, can you explain what dermoscopy training you completed?
Sure. I've been practicing dermatology for 25 years, and I initially learned dermoscopy from Harold Rabinovitz, who teaches a lot of dermoscopy courses. I've taken some additional courses, the health certification in dermoscopy course. That's an international course that is given online, and that's out of Australia. And there's 3 courses to that. You have a primary, and then a secondary, and then you have an advanced. And so I took all 3 of those. So I believe I have a diploma in dermoscopy through that organization.
I'm curious, there's different types of approaches. I guess standard, you think of ABCDs, pattern recognition, there's the 2-step algorithm, 3-step. Do you necessarily follow any of those or just do your own thing?
I don't follow them. I think that they're really good guidelines to follow when you're starting out in dermoscopy. Find one that works for you. But what happens is over time, after you get comfortable with looking at lesions through the dermatoscope, your eyes just look at it, your brain just absorbs it all in, and then you're able to sort it all out. I can say I do not use any of those methods. I just take a look, and then if there's a certain structure within there that draws my attention a little bit more, then I may focus on that. But usually it's more of just the gathering of knowledge and experience that allows you to recognize something right away.
So in this particular lesion that we're looking at, and probably for most pigmented lesions, do you generally look at the pigment network first? What's the order of how you attack them?
So for something like this, the first thing I think about, is this a pigmented lesion or not a pigmented lesion? So you could tell that it is a pigmented lesion because it does have that pigmented network, and that's what you're looking for. So number 1, identify pigmented, non-pigmented. This is obviously pigmented.
And then I'm assuming you assess what unusual features jump out at you.
Once you identify that it is a pigmented lesion, you look at the variegation of the colors. So black, dark brown, white, pink, and then you start really looking at the structures, dots, globules. You see a little bit of gray peppering. If you take a really close look at that lesion, if you expand it in the center there, you can see a few little irregular vessels. You just really need a few of these structures to tell you, hey, this is a melanoma. One thing that's interesting about this picture is that it has all the features that you would see in a melanoma, including a negative pigmented network, which you don't see too often in melanoma. This is a good teaching photograph because of that. That when you look at melanomas, when you find other melanomas, they may have 1, 2, or 3 of these features. They may not have all of them.
So let's say this weren't such a perfect melanoma. Of all of the features that you see here, which to you would be the most concerning?
I would say the blue-white veil and the white structureless areas. Those really stand out because that's indicative of regression. The body is already having an immune response to these cancerous cells, so it's going through a process. So I would say the pink and the whitish colors as well as the dark colors, those really stand out. The irregular brown dots tend to be more concentrated up here in the 12 o'clock area. You see a couple right there. You see a few here. Now you see these brown globules. There's one right here. There's another one right here. There's another one here. And then the atypical advancing streaks, they're right here. And what's interesting is, don't these streaks look like they're advancing, like an advancing border?
Yeah.
So that just lets me know that this is a superficial portion that is evolving. And then you have these fairly large blackish or brownish blotches right here. It's like a blotch that extends. It looks like it's organizing right here. A blotchy area right here. Here you've got this elongated S-like blotch here. And then you have some here and here as well. And of course, there's multiple hyperpigmented areas right here. There's a few right here. That was a globule there. You definitely have some grayish, dark brown right here. There's a spot right there. This is all irregular. This is classically disorganized.
You can let me know if you agree or not. Within all of the dermoscopy jargon, all of the terms, there's a lot to get lost in. And as you're talking here and you're talking about the blotches, the dots and globules and peppering and whatnot, even if you don't know the terms, you can look at this and as you're describing, it's disorganized, it's irregular. I think there's a potential for some people who don't know the terminology by heart to let it scare them away. But in reality, the main thing is just to simply recognize how irregular and disorganized it is, no matter what name it goes by.
Yes, I would agree with that. And when I look at a lesion, I'm not thinking in my mind, oh, there's dots, there's globules, there's peppering. It's not right. Regression structures are really interesting because this is indicative of the body's immune response, trying to gobble up and get rid of these melanocytic lesions here. So whenever you see this blue-white veil, 99% of the time, this is indicative of it being more than just a melanoma in situ. This means that there is something going on a little bit deeper. Also, when you see this chrysalis, and it's really important to get comfortable with using your polarized light and your non-polarized light to bring out some features. And it's just fun to play with whatever you're looking at a lesion. Polarize it, non-polarize it. See what the difference is. But when you have a polarized light, you can see deeper into the structures. And that's when you start to see these polygonal lines here or these orthogonal lines, which are just at right angles. And that also is a feature that is indicative of more of an invasive melanoma. The scar-like depigmentation, we would call that this gray area. It's in transit of being taken over by the body's immune system. When you get these milky areas, these milky pink structureless areas, which to me, I think that's a really good terminology of that because they are structureless. There's nothing that you could really define. It's just like a pink blur. So that is also indicative of a more invasive melanoma.
Yeah, I think as cool as this is to offer this slide, some of those crystalline structures, chrysalis, however we want to call it, they are pretty subtle on this image. When you're actually looking at the lesion with your dermoscope, they're more easily seen and appreciated. Hopefully most who are watching this know and have seen that in person.
Yes, when it varies in some melanomas, boy, they really stand out. And the pictures, you're right, when you photograph it, it never really captures it live as you were to see it in your own dermatoscope when you had the patient and the lesion there right in front of you.
We were talking about how subtle some of the crystalline structures are. Would you agree that the same is true with some of those vessels? Some people are so used to doing contact dermoscopy. Some of those, if you press too hard, it blanches them out, does it not?
That's right. And that's a great thing about the DL5 that I have is you could take that cap off and you could put it aside and then you could look at those vessel structures without any compression. And that's really ideal. Now, in this lesion, I blew this up earlier, and right in the central area, you can see some polymorphous vessels right there. Again, this is indicative of an invasive melanoma, but it's always interesting to see. And again, those vessels in this particular lesion, they don't stand out in a photograph as much as they do live. When you're live and you're looking at it, you're like, oh, okay, I could recognize these right away. And I do take photographs of some of my melanocytic lesions, and I make sure that I got the structures in the photograph. But even when I go back and look at it, they're just not as sharp and clear as they are when you're looking at it in person.
All right, I think that covers it for this. We'll wrap up the discussion with that.